This episode of This Agile Life has been brought to you by BrilliantAgile.com, providing Agile and Scrum training, consultancy, and personnel.
BrilliantAgile.com. Done right, it's brilliant.
Recorded on Tuesday, September 18th, 2012, in St. Louis, Missouri. This Agile Life, Episode 4, Master Debater. Welcome to This Agile Life, a podcast about what it's like to be agile in the real world. Joining me today are my co-hosts, and we have alongside me today Mr. Amos King.
Hey, John, how's it going?
Good, Amos. How are you?
Upright and breathing.
That's a bonus.
It's better than most alternatives.
Also joining us today is Mr. Jason Tice. Jason, how are you, sir?
Doing well, and I'm celebrating Halloween a month early, and I have this very attractive hat, which, if you're listening, doesn't tell you, but we have some pictures where I'm going to be the evil architect today with my red thorns on my head.
You're always an evil
red
architect.
horns.
Red
sorry.
horns.
I've
Red
used
horns.
the wrong word. I need to work on my lexicon tonight, obviously.
Your red horny hat. Okay. And Mr. Matt Corwell, how are you, sir?
Fine. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Thank you for the deep voice.
Matt, would you like to be the evil architect?
I think that's covered in this room for sure, so I'm good to go.
Zing! All right, guys, let's check the news and see what's happening in the world of Agile development.
Well, Dateline, September 6th, 2012. TaskTop Technologies announced the TaskTop Sync Mingle connector earlier this month. This connector gives users the Mingle Agile project management tool the ability to share data with a number of other lifecycle management tools such as Microsoft Team Foundation Server and Atlassian Jira. The tool looks aimed to serve a customer base with an existing investment in lifecycle management tools and a desire to bring Mingle into that mix.
Ooh, Mingle in the mix. Kind of a... Never mind. Forget it.
And they have a great PR writer. Mingle into the mix.
That was me writing that.
Oh. Okay.
Lucky PR writer.
Wow, okay.
This is my copy.
Amos, was there any news you had for us?
Scrum.org has announced a new Java-flavored Train the Trainer event for the professional Scrum developer program. I don't know why I'm reading this. It's Scrum and Java. I'm totally outside of my realm here.
Java is the new thing.
The session will be held in Zurich, Switzerland, November 19th through the 23rd. Although being in Switzerland, I might be willing to go. Scrum.org hopes that the increase in certified trainers for the professional Scrum developer program will increase access to the certification for developers around the world. I would say Scrum is like Agile Light. So
Okay.
Just go ahead and stick with that.
Okay. We should debate that sometime because I think it might be
And
a heavy version of Agile. But
Agile
I
heavy.
guess it depends on how you mean Agile or light versus heavy.
Actually, if I can add an architecture term,
It
it's
depends
a very,
on what the definition of is.
Well, it's a very prescriptive version of Agile.
right. And
So it
there's a lot
tells
of
you
prescriptive
exactly
guidance.
what to do. Now, that might work for some, but it might not work for others. And Agile, in a more pure sense, is, okay, go figure it out. What works for you?
right. There's
It-
something
you know,
about
it-
the certification of Scrum professionals that seems to make me feel like we're missing the spirit of what's going on. That the whole idea that you're going to go be so, like you said, prescriptive that you're going to get certified. I've not been there. I'm sure it's great, but it just feels wrong in the world of let's let it all evolve.
I've just always heard Scrum as you have fixed scope iterations, and
Yes.
once you're there, that's to
You're
me
done.
that's not Agile anymore.
Yeah.
Because you have a fixed scope.
Well, and you kind of have, again, since it is more of a prescriptive practice, there's a little bit more, once you hit, a little more incentive to say hit certain thresholds or metrics. And once you hit those, you can move on, as opposed to the more Agile purists where you're always improving. And I know Matt hasn't been here when in the past we've talked about kind of the market issues with what the market right now is looking for in terms of, consultative services and other things. And, there isn't an Agile in a box solution, but Scrum has presented itself as something which you can buy into it as a program, and you get a toolkit that gives you a rapid lifecycle development process in a box. So supply and demand is actually where a lot of the trending on it is going.
Yeah, there may actually be a fair amount of need or want in the industry for, these developers that have taken and received the professional Scrum developer certificate. Maybe there's companies looking for people like that, and here's one way to scratch that itch.
Companies looking for certifications are not normally companies I want to go work for.
Well, I'm not telling you to go get a job there, Amos. God forbid. We don't. What
can
would
barely
we do
keep the job I
what
have.
would
I
we
don't
do
know
if
about
we
getting
didn't
a new
have
one.
you around here?
Hey, Amos, you want to look at my FIAC textbook? That's 800 pages.
Do I want to look at your what?
FIAC textbook? The Federal Enterprise Architecture.
I thought maybe that was
a whole set of dirty words.
I thought that was maybe a textbook for a new car,
No, it could be.
like is Fiat. I thought you
Fiat?
said.
FIAC, no, FIAC, F-E-A-C.
This Fiat smells like prophylactics and shame.
But hey, let's talk about some
Leather
architecture. So coming up in the news, in London is set to host the 6th annual Software Architect Conference, October 16th through October 19th. Great time to take a trip across the pond. Wonderful weather. Well, the conference is typically focused on traditional software architecture. This year, the conference has increased its scope to include a few sessions and presentations focused on bridging the divide between agility and architecture. If you want to attend, there's still time to register, but you should do that before the early bird discount expires on September 21st.
Are you going to this, Tice?
No, I'm not. Since I'm finding out about this for the first time as we're kind of putting our news together here. However, I have all kinds of theories and of note, knowing that I do support within the DoD space, talking about architecture. The Office of Secretary of Defense and the big Department of Defense has a big initiative saying we must become more agile. They have a bunch of initiatives around that. Those are all then conglomerated through Department of Defense architecture products, which aligns to the same architectural framework that the Ministry of Defense in the UK uses. So the architecture question there is, how much synergy is there between DoD initiatives and MOD initiatives?
He's using those words again.
Yeah, I got lost.
You got lost. So yeah, we need.
I was just surprised that they've had 6 conferences. But I guess if you're an architect, you have a lot of money and a lot of time when you're not doing any actual work, so you can go to all kinds of conferences.
That is true. And I mean, as an exploratory item, when we have a statement that says a software architect, what is that? I mean, is that your traditional person who, in the traditional OO sense, who's going to do UML, who's going to design, stare at the screen or stare at the whiteboard, draw class diagrams, draw interfaces, and actually plan that all out? Or is one of the things I believe we're going to get into tonight, talk about more of an evolutionary design process where we're not going to sit and, take 6 months to architect our solution and then start coding it. We're just going to start doing it.
But how am I supposed to code without a UML diagram?
Exactly.
And you're asking.
That's all I'm saying.
And Mr. Amos is asking me that question when in reality I know how you roll. So there's a little bit of sarcasm in that comment.
You're just frozen, right, Amos?
Froze him?
You're frozen when you don't have your UML
without a
diagram.
I know. I can't do anything. I can't function.
You need a chart to show you where the charts are.
Yes.
Absolutely.
UML of the UML of the UML. It's UML inception.
All right, that's it for the news. We're going to talk some more about architecture, but let's see.
Oh, I think a follow-on activity is. I think we'll see if they post proceedings, and maybe we can do some more Agile talking points about the Software Architect Conference if they release stuff.
Okay, we'll check back with them. For
I
now,
promise to
let's
watch
see
30 seconds of every video that comes out of that conference, but only 30 seconds.
You're gracious. For now, let's see what's up next in our Ready Queue. And first up in the Ready Queue is evolutionary design. So I'll tee this one up because it was my idea and actually spawned out of a brief conversation that I had with Mr. Joshua Karievsky, I think is how you pronounce his name. Do you guys know for sure?
No.
He's a guy that wrote...
I don't speak French.
Or Polish.
Or Russian.
Hey, maybe he's going to the Software Architecture Conference.
So he's a guy that wrote a book on refactoring to patterns. I don't know if you guys ever read that book.
Good pattern. Good
Have
book.
not read it. Heard about it.
Okay. And I followed him. I was following him on Twitter, and he put out a tweet that said evolutionary design is fundamental to software agility, yet I barely see signs of it when visiting beginner agile / lean teams. And that kind of started the conversation, and I said something back about, well, isn't that something that maybe a team sort of evolves into? And he said, oh, no, that's a fundamental piece of what agility is. If you're not doing these thin vertical slices, it's certainly something that a team should be doing right out of the box.
Well, I think it's a hard thing to do, and especially if you're early in projects, you may not have enough code to figure out how you really want it to lay out, and you need to get to usually most people need to get to some sort of pain point in order to learn where they should be splitting things and how that works. But if you start digging into object-oriented principles, if you're doing object-oriented development, those can kind of help you get there from the beginning, so you have less problems. Like tell, don't ask, or single responsibility is really important. But yeah, a lot of teams have a big problem with this. Even my team, we have some issues, but when we go to fix them, it's because we have pain here and we know this needs to change.
Okay. So I want to talk more about that. I first want to give our listeners a quick definition on evolutionary design. So I did a little research to pull something together last night, and basically evolutionary design can be defined as continuously designing and refining the design of the system during development, in the absence of big design up front, BDUF, right? So something that traditional.
That's like a rapper's name.
I know, BDUF.
I bet they talk about that at the software architecture conference.
They do, actually. I looked at a number of the sessions, and one of the sessions was trying to be more agile with architecture. Anyway, this is Agile's approach to doing design. It's do it continuously, flatten out your development such that making changes to the design is not harmful to your schedule and to the development of your end product, and then just continually refine, mostly simplify the design. I heard a tisk.
I started to say something, but no. Go ahead.
Well, so what I wanted to discuss was, especially since we have Mr. Jason Tice, our evil architect du jour, in the room.
You let me know
today.
you're done, and I'm going to break this one open, so you can keep going.
Jason just wants the BDUF of the MVF, and he wants to know the API up front.
You're just trying to get as many TLAs in there as you can.
That's right.
A, B, C, D.
Well, okay, so let's go ahead and tee this up and then open it up for everybody. So the basic premise here is don't do big design up front, and that particularly what I wanted to talk about was at what level should a team start being able to do evolutionary design? Because I don't think it's right out of the gate, and I don't think beginner teams are capable necessarily of doing evolutionary design. So that was the long and short of the conversation I had with Joshua on Twitter.
See, I think that there's a little truth to both sides. I think like Amos said, it is definitely something hard to do, and doing it well is very, very hard and takes an experienced team. But I don't think that you should say, my team is new, so we're not going to at least attempt this. You learn a second language best when you're young. Amos said earlier that if you start out with a language and with like Ruby and you start out with tests from the beginning, it helps you get on the right path from the very start. I think it's the same thing. It may not be done well, but you should do it. You should at least try for it. You should have someone guiding you or helping point you towards these are the things you do now. Maybe you do it, and it isn't very good, so you do it again. It gets a little better and better.
At what expense, though? Because you could harm the schedule. You could harm the flow of the team. You could harm the morale of the team if they're not able to do it, and you keep beating on the team to say you guys aren't doing enough.
You don't have to say that you're designing. You can just refactor a little piece at a time.
So refactoring is part of evolutionary design.
Absolutely.
Right, and a lot of people really like
it
it when you refactor stuff because it gets better. And you don't need everybody on the team being really great at design. I mean, overall, we want to teach them the design stuff because it's really nice when you do have a team like that. But you're always going to have some new people Maybe you get a kid who's directly out of college or directly out of high school even, or maybe didn't even finish high school. And they've just been programming for a long time and putting in scripts and very procedural, and they don't understand design, or they haven't worked on anything big enough to have to worry about it. And so if you just start refactoring, you don't have to beat down their throat that, hey, you need to learn how to do this. You just refactor something and say, hey, do you think this is better? And you can teach them that way.
Yeah, so there are levels of refactoring. I mean, there are basic refactorings like extract a variable or extract a method or pull something up, push something down. Some of those are
Change
design.
variable name.
Some of those are design changes. Some of those are not design changes, right? So you could do a lot of refactoring and never really touch a design per se, as an architectural person might look at a design.
So, John, if we're doing evolutionary design, what's the scope of that work? Because right now we're talking a lot about what I'm going to call the internal semantics of and syntax of the code. Class laydown, method names, method extract, for what a class looks like. Where I have a little bit stronger viewpoint is if we take this a step further and we say, look outside, what the code does, and then how that impacts an evolutionary design process. So, Amos, you're awesome. You got a project.
Thank you, Tyson. I'm glad you finally recognize.
Okay. You got a project. So you're working on some stuff. You get it going. You're building a web app, okay? And your web app has some services that connect, say, the controller to the view. And those are evolving over time. You guys are, pulling stories off the board. You're adding methods and you're changing your service APIs as needed in accordance with your workflow or with your work queue. So your project says you're going to make your services available over the public internet for other people to consume them via Amazon or whatever. I find your stuff and I like what you got. So I want to start building. I want to use your data and use your services to start building my mobile app over here for my mobile device, and I start consuming your services. So now every time you introduce a service change as you're evolving, you potentially introduce more work that I have to do on my end to ensure that I can maintain the contract I have with your service. So this is where from a governance perspective, and if I really want to use what you have, and if you're trying to work within the constraints of, say, a service level agreement that you're offering out there for the people that want to consume your services, that might challenge this and put a little bit more governance on it. How does that work?
I think that you can do a design behind the scenes of not the service, but like the things the service talks to in order to get you the data and continue to keep that outward contract without the inside changing.
Okay.
Yeah, you can follow open-close principle, right?
Right. And to me, what you just described, the outward API, although it is the tangible end-user piece, to me that's just a shell. Like, even in the Agile world, I would be very much okay with, we're developing a mapping API. Here's, the things that there's a very set domain of activities that go on in there. That has very little bearing on how I implement all in the back end.
Okay. So you guys are scoping the evolutionary design to the actual mechanics and knowing that if you say looked at the macro work set for a project, so all the work that needs to be done, there's a finite list of the things that there's actually some motivation to design them up front and effectively put them under a little bit more rigorous change management procedure. But then once you're within the internal scope of the development effort, evolve as needed.
Right. But even like the external, when do you realize that your API needs to change, and then how long do you support it is very dependent upon your users. If I have 500 users, I may say, hey, sorry guys, you got to get over it. If I'm Twitter and I have millions of people using my API, okay, I probably want to keep some backwards compatibility going on.
Well, there's a common paradigm for changing the invocation points or the endpoints in a service. You don't. If you need a different endpoint with accepting different parameters, etc., you create new ones.
Yep.
How is that sustainable? So that means if I'm the service provider, you're saying that I then have to
infinitely sustainable. So then
I have to, if I'm the service provider, I have to maintain all the prior versions of my service over time.
That's where I have a problem.
You don't have to. You don't necessarily have to. You can communicate to your people and say, the consumers of your service, and say, listen, this one's terribly outdated. You've got X number of months to get off of it. But why couldn't you? Why couldn't you just endlessly support it? Unless there was really some hard and fast reason why you couldn't, I think you would just leave it there forever. It's open to extension, closed to changes or modifications, because you're violating the contract that you set up with the person that's consuming that service by changing the interface. End of story.
I'm just thinking through that we know things need to evolve, and I'm trying to say that a lot of your traditional service design life cycles are pretty heavy, and there's a lot of thought put up front. Okay, what exactly does a service contract need to look like? And there's lots of data to show sometimes services are envisioned, the contracts are defined, then they start doing incremental implementation of those services, and they actually never implement all the features because things changed in that dev cycle.
What if you have two separate sets of services? So one is like your services that you support forever, and then any new development you put into, you say it's like an incubator services. So you say, hey, everybody out there who's using this API, you can use this, but it's likely to change. And then you let it evolve in that incubator till you're ready to pull it in and say, I'm going to support this for maybe forever.
I think what I hear Jason saying is that there are people that think that they should go through this analysis and design phase of discovering what are all the ways that somebody's going to interact with my service, and then creating them all, whether or not I have a use for them or not. And I think that that's a complete waste of time. I think you should only create the service endpoints that you have a consumer for. But there are spaces where you're going to lose a development team, and so you want to try and guard against not having a service available, so you want to dream up every possible scenario for how somebody's going to interact with that service, but you just can't possibly do that. So create only the basics of what you need. And back to your original question, what's the scope? The scope is what I'm working on today and what I'm about to work on in the next day or two, as far as what I'm worried about doing evolutionary design on.
Yeah, but the only challenge is that, and as a realist, that breaks down in a lot of different contexts. In an Agile organization, that works and that's effective. But if you're in an organization where you have where you have Agile that's trying to operate Agile's trying to operate, do evolutionary design, but they're operating within a more rigorous governance procedure where there's the need to generate a statement of work that says, okay, let's go out and define the features that we're going to implement for the next year, and we're going to do that in advance of before we start implementing them. There are real environments like that, and that's where this is challenging.
That way, when we change our mind partway through, we can screw you on the contract because we've said you're going to do this feature, and then we end up not doing it, so I can not pay you.
Well, but the notion of if you're in an environment where you have to do rigid AQ cycles that have very long cycle times, of which in most instances it's a year, since the standard budget cycle that most companies use is a year. This is a challenge, and knowing that as there's the desire to ensure that the value is provided for consultative development services to facilitate accountability, there's one of the mindsets is, well, let's go document what we think we're going to need at some level of detail, and then we'll contract that out and then measure the performance of the developers to do that work against that initial contract. I mean, that's a little mini waterfall. You can do all the little iterative development and delivery cycles in that, but the problem is the requirement set has still been defined at for a very large scope.
So you can still contract for somebody to say, I want you to build X, and here are the 32 statements of what I want the thing to do, right? That doesn't mean I have to then spin for 3 months on coming up with an architecture that supports that. I could give birth to an Agile team, get them started, say, here are the 32 things I want you to do, and the most important one is this. Here's how you do it. Go ahead.
And then I'm not failing on evolutionary design. I can change anything I want up until that delivery date, right?
Yeah.
So if I haven't published the API, then I can still design that API over an evolution. And especially if I have
what if it's a requirement? What if it's a requirement to define that API as part of the contract? Like when I say the contract, not the web service contract, but the actual contract by which the work is done.
I would argue that they are probably not going to know, and I would try to talk to the customer about that because they're probably not. They may define it then, but it'll probably change before your contract's up.
No, I think that's a very honest answer because it's hard to know that unless you're doing development that largely aligns to, an established standard. You can say, hey, we're just using this standard API that, Google or, Twitter or some big provider uses, and you can assume it's not going to change over.
Or, yeah, like if you're writing a replacement component that does some services for some government thing that calls out to it, if you're writing a replacement component, you have to meet a certain contract because they have some giant system that was written in 1945 that's still there.
I don't think we had computers there. Well,
The Enigma machine.
So if somebody wants...
my takeaway from this is that, I think the evolutionary design is needed to ensure to really get the benefit out of Agile, because it's really embracing the principles of the manifesto that talk about lessons learned. We're getting smarter, we're learning by doing. And so we have to do that. And people on teams, even as Amos said, some of the less experienced members of the team need to be encouraged that that's something that everyone needs to support. It's not just something the lead goes and does, and he does the design. So from a coaching standpoint, if you're in a coaching role and you see that, that's something that needs to be addressed because the team should own the design. My only takeaway is that I think there are certain things in the development space, like perhaps a web service contract, that might need a little bit more governance over how they're controlled.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about the mechanics of how you do evolutionary design, because I think that's what you started to touch on. Who owns it? Who does it? How do you do it? Those are the questions before us today. So what are the mechanics of evolutionary design?
To me, and I have a much, I guess, more focused scope than what you're talking about from the large enterprise service architecture kind of stuff. For me, pretty much without fail, whenever we're working on something and someone says, well, how do we want to design this? I respond with, I don't know, let's write some tests and see where they lead us. So for me, that's the mechanics, is, putting one foot in front of another in the test and finding out what feels best, what has the fewest smells, what connects things together in an easy way. And so for me, the idea of evolutionary design is just really fundamental to TDDing your code and driving it out and just saying, I'm not writing tests to have test coverage. I'm writing tests to help me discover the structure as I go. And so that to me is the basic mechanic of fundamental.
Okay.
So how does that work, Matt, to evolve a design? So, suppose you're in the favorite legacy environment we always talk about. Hey,
Java.
No, I'm saying, okay, you're a dev consultant. You're Amos, Amos, the big super developer. Hey, Amos, here's this application that, we don't trust the code. We don't know what it does. We got we got classes that are like 12,000 lines long and have methods that are like 10,000 lines long. We have no tests. How do you start what Matt's proposed, which is doing that, using tests to define your design if you inherit that messed up project?
Well, it didn't matter. There was no design in the first place. So whenever you start touching components, you can start putting a design into them, refactoring, pulling out methods, sometimes you'll see great big methods that are like 300 lines of code, and you start looking at it, and it should be its own class. And you start pull little components out of that, and that's how you can build the design up over time. And you'll find out that you don't necessarily have to have a diagram or a layout of how all these objects are going to interact. By the time you get done, they're already in some sort of design phase, and as long as you keep trying to move to easier to test, easier to work with, small single responsibility components, things like that, you end up at a design point which is usually pretty decent. And actually, if you have, I said this the other day, I said the interesting part of software is in the edges and not the nodes. Sure. So I'm not worried about your class. If your classes are good, I keep going back to object-oriented because it's what I've been doing all day. Your objects, if they're good, when you pull up an object to show somebody, they should go, why did you even write that? It's worthless. It doesn't do much of anything.
Oh, yeah.
And if you're doing it right, then yes, all the nodes are stupid. It's the interactions between the nodes that are the complexity of the software. And if you do it right, then you really don't have to think about that a whole lot. It will evolve itself.
I love you, Amos.
So I go
Take
back,
it easy.
So I go back to what
You want to
Matt
make out later?
Well,
Take it easy.
In front of Tice.
Oh, please. I'm going to put my hat, my little devil horns over here.
I knew that's a stripper's hat.
Okay, that makes me. You want to look at the pictures on the website at www.thisagilelife.com. But back to what Matt mentioned. So the thing that, and again, I'll be the architect in the room, and I'm going to talk about all the things that architects love to do and love to talk about. So what Matt described is what I'm going to call some criteria for when you know you have a good design by looking at tests. How do you measure that? Is that just a warm fuzzy? Is it based upon experience? I know the static code tool analysis vendors would love to run analytics on your test cases and probably give you a health report. Who knows if that's any good or not?
I measure it in pain.
So what is that, Amos?
So you can look at a lot of things: method size, class size, churn.
Churn defined as
churn
number of people that leave the team because they get frustrated.
Well, that too, that works. Churn defined as how often a file has to change. If it's changing a bunch and you go and look at it, it's probably not got one responsibility.
And I didn't say you could measure. I don't think I did. So you said you could measure a good design by looking at the test. I said that writing tests will help lead you to a good design. I think there's a subtle difference there because I think that as you follow, as Amos just said, the pain points, we call them code smells, but pain points, writing your test, you say, I have to do this. Whenever I work with, we work like a new developer, somebody who's just starting out, and anytime it's difficult for them, I say, if doing what you're doing is difficult, if it's painful, there's probably something we should do differently. We should probably change something. We probably alter our design, move this object away, separate this method out, refactor our dependency injection, whatever it is. There's some pain point that will lead me to that. So to your question on the metrics, I don't know. I don't know what would be a metric that measures it.
So the real scenario, maybe this is something we got to think about for a while, and we might not have a solution tonight. But so suppose I'm one of those dreaded folks called a compliance officer. And so anyone who's
I just wouldn't talk to you.
Okay.
Yeah, I get you run off the team.
But in the market, Agile's evolving. People are talking about CMMI, CMMI certifications for Agile organizations, whereby you have to demonstrate competencies for how you do processes. And if you're in an Agile software development agency, you're doing software development. So how would you, if you had to go before a compliance board, or how would you assert, to think in a test, that you have a good design? And that the processes and procedures that consultancy uses to develop that software got you to that good design, and that those can be sustained without having Matt on the team.
Can we put a big comment up at the top of every file that every time a developer goes, oh, screw this, and gets up and walks away, that everybody around runs over to that file and increments the number that's in that comment, and you base your design on the higher that number, the worse your design is.
Well, I like that.
Okay.
That's that is a
I actually think that's a really
quantitative
good idea.
metric that we can put on a chart. I like that.
I know. I was trying to give you a number because I know you're in love with numbers and not feelings.
And I think it's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing. If we were going to go in front of a compliance board, I mean, I guess it wouldn't work in the immediate, but I'd say, hey, take me off the team and have somebody else try and mess with it. If the design is clean and simple, you should be able to make large changes, make team member switches, do all these different things, and have the process. You shouldn't have any major hiccups. You have the process keep flowing.
I don't know. I hate all developers that wrote code yesterday, including me.
Right. You're always learning.
So
We all do. But
that might be a bad metric.
But the topic
my
here
level of hate
is not about the compliance, satisfying the compliance officer.
Sorry.
It's not a problem. What the real topic is how do you know you have
a good design?
So to Matt's point, one of the things that you said, Matt, when someone asks how to do design, you say, let's write some tests and see. That is an approach. There's nothing wrong with doing a little chicken scratch on the back of a napkin design of how you want to do things, or saying to someone, let's use this metaphor, let's use that metaphor, let's do a strategy pattern, let's do, let's use the decorator pattern. I think those are all acceptable things to do as well. So...
Yeah, I wasn't speaking as the only option, but for me personally,
I understand.
If those things, if the strategy pattern, if the decorate pattern are the right things to do, I really firmly believe that you can drive your way into that by following the smells and the pains in the test and finding ways to alleviate them, and you'll get there if it's where you should be.
And that's what Joshua's book, Refactoring the Patterns, is all about. So he would probably take your approach as well and say, let's start off with some tests. Let's let the problem space and the code tell us how it needs to be organized to work best. And then as we notice that there are smells or we notice that things are leaning a certain direction, let's go ahead and use some refactorings to do the design and to evolve the design to something more substantial or meaningful or even more simple.
Yeah, I would totally agree, and I would think that this is one of the fundamental, I think, features of Agile, but it fits directly into design. I can't tell you how many times when we have sat down and tried to have a more formalized design up front, by the time we get into writing stuff, we go, well, we didn't need this. We didn't need to check for that. We didn't even need to call this. We thought we did.
Right.
But when you get into it, it didn't happen. So from my point of view, just if you just let go and, let the tests or Agile or whatever flying spaghetti monster, just not worry about it. And to me, a good design is when I'm not really thinking about it, when it just feels right. Do whatever feels good.
And the key thing for us not to lose track of, since I brought up the notion of compliance, is it is the core tenet of or one of the core tenets of the manifesto. That being that Agile is really all about delivery, which isn't called out in the manifesto. It's has to do with some of the terms with the folks that I hang with, but it's all about delivering. So this notion of you're delivering the features, and maybe one of those features, for the points I brought up earlier, is compliance or usage of a specific web service contract, which maybe is defined up front for you. But beyond that, let the process evolve, let people be innovative, and let really people learn from those lessons so they can be efficient and deliver beyond the initial expectations. And maybe you have a feature set, but then you get done and you have to, in those acquisition environments that are rigorous, do a contract mod to say, hey, we got time to do more features, so let's do those.
I'm perfectly okay with that. I'm actually okay with the design up front that I think should be is the outside design. What is my public interface to
your
to me?
End user feature set? What
right.
the users get?
What do they have? And then taking a top down approach helps me evolve design a lot. I get really frustrated, and every once in a while I will jump in and do it too. Whenever somebody comes in, it's like, okay, we have this feature. Let's start at the database level. Let's design what our database schema is going to look like. And I'm like, whoa, this is totally the wrong place. And every time that I have even fallen back to that, just because it's old habit and it dies hard sometimes, by the time I get up a few levels, half of the stuff that is in that data I don't need, I don't want, and now I have to go back, and if I'm working with like MySQL or a traditional database, I have to write schema migrations to change that.
Go Mongo.
Go Mongo.
Yeah, go Mongo.
And so that can be a real pain. And since I've worked up from the bottom, usually if you start going back and you look at the interactions there, that's whenever you have the worst design ever, where you have objects that are doing 40 different things because you're like, oh, I need this data, I need this data, I need this data. Let's throw it all in one table.
Yeah,
so that's an anti-pattern to start.
I think one of the key takeaways.
So always start at the top.
I think
outside in. Sorry.
Well, I think one of the key takeaways.
Can I cut you off one more time?
No, that's fine. I think one of the
wait. Just
really? Let's just
more.
keep talking. We'll just talk over each other. So, I think one of the key takeaways from this discussion, especially from my viewpoint, thinking about big requirement cycles, slow cycle times, is what we call design needs to evolve. It should be a feature set. It should be usability patterns. It shouldn't be the old traditional requirements type documents and UML diagrams that many of us are thinking of. And the challenge is, as we see that as evolutionary design evolves within the dev space, I think that there's a whole bunch of supportive activities, even going to acquisition and contracting and architecture, where it hasn't percolated out there yet for those practices to change. And for this all to work, that needs to occur. That's going to occur, in the next few years, I think, because we know where Agile and we know where evolutionary design is being pushed. And I know from the chair that I sit in, I know where the friction is between, okay, we got iterative cycles of development, but we're trying to do that within a very rigid environment, and that boundary does not work well. So I think we're going to see changes there, and I think the end result will be that this notion of what a design is that looks upfront will change.
Well, and where's the change going to come from? Is it going to come from the iterative cycle side or the rigid side? That is what I would be interested in. And I'm guessing, at least from what I've seen so far of the evolution of Agile, is that it's going to come from the rigid side. The rigid side will slowly change.
The rigid side has to give. I mean, it's and from the top down, a lot of the people that drive the rigid side, at least they're talking, oh, we must become Agile. So there's leadership pressure to do that, but the action, again, those talking points have not materialized into the actual changes that will make this work.
Well, you don't build a bridge too rigid, otherwise it'll fall down.
Tacoma Narrows.
Look up Tacoma Narrows on Google and watch the video.
Can you spell it?
No.
I can't spell for crap. So
you can't spell Tacoma, Tacoma.
That's why
so
Google.
You can spell it then.
That's why Google has that wonderful feature called "Did You Mean?"
Did you mean architecture? No, I meant evolutionary design.
French military victories? Did
does
you
that work?
mean French military defeats?
So what guys do you think a team needs to have in place to enable them to do evolutionary design?
People.
First of all, one of the things you mentioned, Amos, was that the 10,000 line class with spaghetti code methods maybe didn't have any design. It may have had. I disagree and say it may have had a bunch of big design up front.
Well,
But nobody designed it
no
after
design means that you have made nothing. You have design. It's just
Design is
one
like
giant
architecture. There's 4 types, and the first one that everyone always forgets about is that you say you just don't acknowledge that you actually have architecture, just like you have design. It's just not formal.
yes. I don't know what else to say to that.
Yeah, that one needs the visual. We have
It was just a crapshoot.
No, we have a pyramid for that, but
Architecture.
it's funny. So the architecture analogy about the 4 levels of architecture applies to software design too. I mean, you have a design whether you choose to admit it or not at level 0.
It might be crap.
Yeah,
but you still have one.
you still
That's
have
what
one.
I'm saying is if you write a line of code, that line of code has design because 40 different people will write it differently.
Unless it's hello world.
They'll even write it
Yeah,
differently.
you're right. You can,
So given that evolutionary design was going to rely on refactoring and making just-in-time changes to the design of the code, what do you guys think a team needs to have in place to enable them to do evolutionary design?
I really think it's a matter of what shouldn't they have in place rather than what should they have in place. They
Oh, you want to go that way, huh?
well, it seems like that. I don't know that there's
they
anything
should
that
not have a rigorous governance board.
Yeah, well, that's a pretty good start. You know, like it really comes down to, like Amos said, people, right? You need to have, first off, an awareness of an idea that you're working towards an evolutionary design, or that you're at least working through a TDD, Agile. You know, you've got to be acknowledging that you're attempting to be in this space, right? But beyond that, what you need is just to me, the let go, right? You need somebody not telling you that you have to have this all documented. You need somebody not telling you that everything has to be figured out up front. You need somebody just telling you, just go make it work, deliver something.
Well,
right?
and the other thing that where things break down, and I think all of us in the room have probably been on teams where we've seen this struggle, or we've actually seen it abandoned, is that the process, the notion of evolutionary design is driven as a control system. To what Matt said earlier, you have to do the work and write the tests. You can't just go do evolutionary design without the tests because you have no control and you have no safety net.
That's the key.
Well,
And that's where I think evolutionary design has gotten a bad name in the market space, because people say, oh, we can just go do whatever. They don't do their homework and write the test, do the work, and they lose that control.
Code is just a byproduct of your test. It really is.
Yeah, and then you get the overreaction effect, which is, no, we need rigid governance. We need to have someone who you didn't work with review every single line of the code that you wrote to make sure it does exactly what it's supposed to do, and that just doesn't work. So.
Yeah. To revamp my previous statement, I think the desire to deliver something quickly is a key to evolutionary design. If you want to get something in front of the customer right away, you want to get your real MMF out and to the door and move on to the next feature. That's if you want to sit there for 6 months and get everything all put together, you're not going to have a lot of impetus to do an evolutionary design. But if you want to get something delivered today, just let it go, and then tomorrow evolve it to what you need tomorrow.
I think letting it go is really important too. I've seen many times where forward progress completely stops because somebody wants to argue on whether they should use a decorator pattern or not. Write a freaking test, figure it out. We'll deal with it later.
I hate
Let's just
decorator
move
pattern.
on.
Well, okay, you and I are going to have words because I love the decorator pattern.
I think
Wait,
cross-cutting
wait.
turns is awesome.
What? The decorator pattern is never mind. No.
Yeah.
No.
Is that an IEEE approved standard?
The decorator pattern?
This is quickly turning into a Dilbert.
Well, that means it has entertainment value.
Good.
Well, I have to admit, I want to push the agenda a little bit because I want to evolve the architecture
I
discussion.
really want to go back to this decorator pattern thing not being a
on,
violation of
baby.
the law of Demeter.
Well, no.
Because that's all it is. It's a big
Right.
class that's
And
completely based
it also
on the law
depends
of
on how it's
Demeter.
implemented, because if your decorator pattern is interface, listen, if you want to wrap, logging or security around every method call or something, that's fine. I'd rather have some kind of interceptor pattern than the decorator pattern. But if you're going to say I'm going to implement my IX, I interface 1, and have it implemented in 17 different places and just chain on down through itself, like most of them, in my experience, 90% of the calls are just pass-throughs, and you want that logging around one statement or something. I think there's usually better ways to accomplish it.
Man, and I was really just trying to troll. I was hoping somebody would go, "It's not a law."
I think you're Now you screwed me up, Amy.
So has
I
anyone
googled
done?
law of Demeter.
See, I'll just
'Cause I
ask
couldn't think of what it was
a
off the top of my
personality
head.
question for the co-host. Has anyone actually done formal debate in here?
You mean,
not
have
me.
we been married?
No, well, that will get you. That will get you. But
It's not normally formal debate. It's formal apology.
No,
At least from our side.
I mean, it's a
Formal
political
begging.
season, but I'm saying to actually, it'd be fun to maybe do a real debate about a pattern. Like, pick a side and go smash. I mean, just as a decorator pattern.
Abstract factory pattern. Stop writing freaking Java.
Well, and I'll share over in the architecture space, we're kicking around ideas of actually doing this with architecture frameworks. Because if you've ever looked into some of the things that are in architecture framework, they fight with each other. And some frameworks play nicely together. Some do not integrate because they want to sell the tooling and the standards and the consultative services that make a framework go. Again, that's what the market wants. But because of that, you can debate those, which is, we'll see if that's entertaining.
We may not be doing formal debating, but we're doing some informal debating.
Sure. Well,
You're a master debater.
Well, I have one thing that I want to throw out there, which I think we'll call it a lightning talk, but we'll close out the architecture discussion about evolutionary design. So Amos, you and I have worked together and stuff, and we have different current roles in what we do. I have a role to be an architect, and I have a role to do architecture to help support and improve how software development teams do work. What could I give you?
Shouldn't a prerequisite for that be a good developer?
Oh,
I had to.
But
I
I'm
had to.
ching.
No, I actually like Tice. So.
Okay, but big docs, we know they're not going to read them. We got data on that. What should I give you? I mean, so if I'm going to go do some work and I got lots of things that I need to architect, what would you actually use?
A few small stories.
Yep.
And I hate wikis. If you put a wiki in front of me, I might read it the first couple of days in order to get a handle on stuff. But after that, usually the wiki is irrelevant because people don't keep it up to date very well. And I would rather at individual story levels. So give me a tool that you can put stories into, and then it allows me to comment on the stories, on what I'm doing and how I'm doing it along the way, so that the things that I learn can evolve like our design, and I can place it into that and then make it searchable later. And that's what I care about.
So you're saying that me as an architect should give you as a hands-on the keyboard developer who's going to build stuff like a story list of here's what you need to build.
Here are the features you need, not here's how you need to build. Here's the UML
we talked about
diagram.
earlier, the 32 features that I need to put in. You give me that, and we'll find a way to work through it. But if you give me a bunch of diagrams,
I think what you should give the team is a set of user stories that are focused on things that an architect might be concerned with, such as how to interact with an endpoint or security concerns or some other large sort of infrastructure or architectural concerns that could be translated into, let's call them technical stories, where they're stories from the perspective of technically evolving the application or the design.
Yeah, or it's at the infrastructure level. So if anyone has actually looked at the scaled architecture framework, that's what they call the architectural runway, which is up at the very top level of that whole ecosystem of Agile. The thing that I'll throw out there, just one other question on that topic is, okay, Amos, I do this work. I give you story lists to go build enterprise service to do X, Y, and Z. You do that. Matt comes along. He wants to use the same service. How does that work? So what does Matt need to, in terms of his architectural guidance, to actually go ahead and consume that service and use it to support whatever his application is supposed to do?
Well, it depends on what the scale of the service is. I mean, if it's a RESTful service, in the last two projects that we've developed RESTful services on, we kept some kind of like Java Docky style auto-generated, hey, as we build out controllers and methods and actions with our tests, it automatically just kind of plays out, here's my structure for you. If something higher than that, if like a Windows, like a WDL, whatever all that stuff is, WSDL, yeah, the redefinition of the verbs and actions and all that. I don't know.
I feel like this is a trick question. I mean, because I feel like you want a big answer, and the real answer is 3 lines of code that show me how to use the service.
Yeah, that's That's what I want as a
curl
consumer.
example.
Or
Yeah.
even I've seen you were talking about RESTful. I've seen some services out there that if you know the RESTful URL structure, I know it's not RESTful, but like a call to new. I've seen some of them that actually return you the
What you need to pass in.
JSON that you need to fill out and then pass it back.
Yeah.
That's beautiful, especially if it tells me what types those things are. Done. And then I can maybe give me an endpoint that I can test it on that might give me back crap or whatever, but I'm not muddying up production data, and allow me to ping it once or twice to kind of figure out how that thing works. Because no matter what your documentation says, it may not be right.
Yeah.
And I've run into that many, many times, and I don't think that any upfront architecting or design or anything is going to help with the fact that sometimes documents get a little out of date.
Well, no, as long as
Sometimes?
No. But as long as no. But going back
Most
to
of the
what
time.
John
Always.
said, John said once I release a service, I should keep it in production forever. So
Right.
as long as my document was correct when I released,
your service is in production forever, but let's say that you have a field that they need to pass in, and when you originally put it into the database, you said it could be
32 characters,
32
and then it
characters.
got to be 64 characters.
or 16.
Sure.
So, yeah, I had to change that service because maybe there's some governmental who cares? There's some like really strict requirement that says no, these need to be 16. So now I need to change that service to return you an error if you give me a 32
Nope.
digit, but I forgot to put it into the
You
document.
can't change the service, Amos. You have to create a new service.
Do you just trim? What does the old service do? Whenever they pass in 32, you can't put it in the database because for some reason, let's say
You
it's
can't
not
turn
32.
that off. You can't just turn it off
But
like that.
I think his point is that sometimes the fundamental underlying data changes.
It has
if,
to change.
If my service gave you lists of cars, but we no longer as a business provide lists of cars that are available to buy, what is your service going to do?
So you have to deprecate the service because there has to be this handoff of I don't accept this call anymore, which you used to be able to
No, I
pass
still accept
32
the
in.
call. It's just that I've changed.
It's not explicit. It's happening underneath the covers, and somebody may never understand. They may never go back and change their code to check for 16.
Well, the error codes that you're returning suck then.
So it's more directive if you deprecate the service call and then create a new service call.
But what if it's a legal requirement? I can no longer accept whatever type of data you're sending me
I think you're making
in that
things up
format.
now.
No. That's
I've
this
been
is
in
true
situations like this. Healthcare.
Deprecate the service method that used to take 32 and create a new service method that takes the 16.
Is not
And
the error
then,
message his
and then
deprecation?
John, to close it out,
Well,
after some period of time,
to
do we
me,
actually
yes.
turn off the deprecated
Yes.
method? Okay, so it eventually goes away.
Right.
So what do we do with the data that comes in on the deprecated method?
You have to.
That we
No
can't,
route-
we
timing.
can't handle
404,
anymore.
no
I mean,
route
you
to
have
host.
to. No, you have to accept it for some period of time. There has to be an attrition or window, or you work out an agreement that says it's going to be gone. The point
Well,
is,
it depends on if
here's-
the government comes in and makes a law and says today.
You-
And our
Quit trying
example
to confuse
wait,
me
our
with
example is
facts.
really naive.
Well, I think
Our example is really naive, but there are things that happen like that, and it sucks. But lawyers get a hold of stuff, government gets a hold of stuff. IEEE decides to change some standard. Okay, well, we ignore their standards anyway. But somebody changes something to where you actually are no longer allowed to accept on this date, period. And sometimes you don't have a whole lot of leeway on when that date is. It might be your boss comes in today and goes, oh, crap, I just found out we're getting sued because we're collecting this piece of data and we can't anymore, especially with health. They've decided I can't collect your blood type because
So-
there's a way to find out who you
so
are
I-
from
I
the
think
blood
the
type or
best
something
and-
stupid like that.
the best and most explicit way to do it is to deprecate the service and tell everybody this is going away because of this regulation and law that your stupid senator passed. Now we're going to have this new thing that is going to be more appropriate to what your stupid senator said we need to do. And this is going to be,
What did our stupid senator say?
I don't know, whatever made up thing Amos is coming up with is healthcare stuff.
Ryan, let's pick one.
We talked
So-
about politics last time. Let's not do it again.
Let's pick one, Sarbanes
Yeah.
Oxley.
Oh,
I mean,
there's a-
there are a lot of these things. I think as a takeaway, this notion of how you do service lifecycle management, of which there's many traditional methodologies, most of them are very waterfall-centric, in an agile space where you might have some evolutionary design or you might have some unanticipated changes like government regulations. That's something that We don't know, and I'm sure when we listen to the recording of this back, I think we were probably all over the place with talking about, exactly, because I know at one point you said sustain every service in production forever, John, and that just doesn't work.
I think this is a canonical example of the less thinking, more doing. If this were a real situation, we can hypothesize on this all day long. But until we're in this situation, I don't think it does. This is not the last responsible moment to have this discussion. We should wait until we have a service that needs to last forever, and then figure out how we're going to deal with it. Otherwise, keep on evolving your design.
Then by
It's like
your
pregnancy,
logic,
less thinking, more doing.
by your logic, we should not have this podcast. Don't tell me that talking is not valuable, Matt, because that's the only currency I have in this podcast is my talking.
Talking is valuable. What do I know? So, it looks like that's about all we're going to get to in this podcast, huh?
Yeah, I think that's just about it for today.
Don't you love how Matt and I hijacked the host role? That's kind of fun.
Hey, it's evolving.
Ooh, it's evolutionary.
Evolutionary hosting. Okay, so that's all we have time for today. Let's go ahead and get our picks in. And today we'll start with
Matt Corwell.
Given that he's not ready,
I know, Matt Corwell.
Yeah.
we'll start with Matt Corwell.
Yes.
It's all Amos's fault.
Yeah, Amos put me on the spot. I'm just going to own it. I got no picks today. I apologize. I've been
Have you read any books lately that were good?
I haven't read any books. I went to an
blog
MMA
post?
fight this weekend. Actually, I put on an MMA fight this
There you go.
weekend. I would pick that out.
Why don't you plug that?
How about
That's cool?
Well, it's
over with.
already over.
Yeah, it's over. It was a real good turnout though. But that was my pick.
How about
But it makes
motorcycles?
a social media
Yeah.
romp, so you could probably follow it online.
Yeah, motorcycles are cool. I love choppers.
He's got the black eyes to prove that he was in an MMA fight.
No,
wait, you put on an MMA fight.
Yes.
I misunderstood. So
Yes.
then what are the black eyes from?
He was the ring girl.
You redheaded ginger.
All right, Amos, what are your picks this week?
So I picked T-Mux before, and I've been using it for a little while, and I went back and read a book that I had read already. It's pretty short. It's T-Mux Productive Mouse-Free Development. It's on pragmatic programmers. Crap, let me go look up the author real quick. Brian P. Hogan. And I appreciated the book a lot more the second time through, especially after I'd been using Tmux for a longer period of time. So if you like things like Vim and working from the command line and you don't like to touch your mouse ever, Tmux can be a really great thing. It also works really well for remote pair programming, and he talks about all of that in there and gives some great tips on how to use it better. And my pick number 2 is I actually roast my own coffee, and I really love it. It's a big nerd. They want me to shake up. That's some beans I bought today. If you want a really nerdy pursuit, people get into making their own home roasters, hooking up to Arduinos, hooking their computers, and getting copies of the roast profile, which is like the temperature over time. And when you're roasting, it's really cool. It sounds like popcorn. 2 times. They call it first crack and second crack, and they mark all that on a graph. And so you can get really, really nerdy into it, which that's what got me into it, and I love coffee. So there's a really good place to start is sweetmarias.com. They sell beans. They sell roasters. You can roast in your oven. You can roast on top of the stove, or you can buy an expensive roaster. But get some beans, and they have also a lot of documentation on their site on how to get started in home roasting. And you can do it with an air popcorn popper if you want.
So if you roll back the timeline of this podcast at about 45 to 47 seconds, based on how it gets edited, Amos said he hates Java, yet he's the guy sitting here with the 2 bags of coffee on the table.
Neither of which are from Java. One is from Ethiopia and one's from Sumatra, not the country of Java.
Yeah, and now
even though they do make coffee.
And now we're talking about computing quantitative metrics over time, key performance indicators for how you roast your coffee.
Damn, he got you there.
You are such,
I'm going to have to stop roasting coffee.
You are such an architect, and you don't
Or
even
just
know it.
let it go until it feels right.
That's what I do.
Amos
Actually.
is an
I don't
architect
actually
in denial.
So I got into all those. I got
then see
into
if
it
it
because
tastes
of all
right.
those nerdy things. But I don't have a thermometer. I use a whirly pop stovetop popper, and I just like listen to the sound of it and decide when to stop.
The sound of
I'm
silence.
surprised we're not using the lawnmower we talked about on the previous episode that you like to drive around and drink beer as you cut your grass to roast the coffee.
Yeah, I haven't gotten to do that
Who
this
doesn't
summer.
drink beer when they cut their grass? That's why you cut the grass.
I know, but I haven't been able to do that this summer. Now I just drink beer.
Yeah, I haven't mowed since June. In case anybody needed to know.
I got some picks that I'll
Start the
go
mower
over.
up. No, you're last.
I'm last? Wow.
Because you again pick 3 different things instead
No,
of
the
2.
first one we're not talking about.
You
Why not?
I'm giving you the last word on the picks.
Okay, thank you,
my
Bill
pick-
O'Reilly.
My
That's not
picks
fair.
Today, well, too bad. I'm the boss. My picks today are 2 blogs. The first one is Avail Agility, availagility.co.uk by Carl Scotland. And the other one is called Herding Cats, herdingcats.typepad.com by Glenn B. Allman. Both of these are things that I read on a regular basis. And I don't necessarily always agree with Mr. Scotland and Mr. Allman, but I do appreciate the work that they do and find it quite stimulating and interesting to read. So I suggest you guys check those out. And as promised, Mr. Tice, you have the last word on the
So
picks.
last but certainly not least, for those of you that, as you listen to the recording, you might wonder what went down in the podcast about 5 minutes ago. So useful tool that we've been using as we were exploring how to use time boxes effectively and following up on a thread whereby perhaps everything in life should have a time box is www.online-stopwatch.com. Great web-based tool for doing online online countdown stopwatches, timers. What am I looking to say here? Which are free and available. If you're having a meeting, you want to throw it up on a projection screen. Everyone then can see the time. And tonight we used one just to kind of keep an eye on how we were doing on time in the podcast, which is a little bomb with a really long fuse that eventually blows up. And I think you guys listening to the podcast probably can figure out when it all blew up here and we saw the beautiful display of colors and we all knew, hey, it's time to wrap this. So if you're doing anything that involves a time box, try it. It might work great for pairing too. So time your pairing sessions.
There's also the option where you can look at the clock and do some math, but
Who wants to do that?
right, it's
The,
not any
the
fun.
shock and
math.
awe of the bomb exploding when the fuse runs out was good. And of course, time boxes we will talk about in the future because they can lead to bad habits when people feel they have to fill the time box even though it's not needed. Last but certainly not least, since Jod was plugging blogs, I plugged the leadership blog by Mike Myatt. He's a Forbes guy, but he's one of the latest guys we talked about in a previous episode, the whole idea of, there is no such thing as best practices. And back in August, he had a blog post about that. But the overall theme of the blog is basically debunking some of the socialized myths about leadership, such as best practices. So lots of interesting reading, and if you read it, it will definitely get you thinking.
Sounds
Great.
good, Tice. Can I do one last pick just for Tice?
How much money you got?
It's called governance. He loves governance.
I love governance. Governance,
That's
agile,
it. That's
That was
it.
the pick, governance.
I've heard him say governance a bunch of times. So I just
agile
thought I'd
governance is
jump in
the
there.
next big thing. So if you
know.
don't believe me, wait till they publish a program for Agile 2013. It's going to have agile governance stuff all over it.
Okay, we'll see.
And it's not going to be stuff that I submitted.
That's one way to accomplish it. Self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
You just
so
do it
the
all
world
yourself.
should go submit presentations about agile governance.
Okay, good picks, guys. Nice show. Thanks for joining me today. I'd like to thank a couple of people that aren't in the room. Well, one person in particular, Mr. Adam Axe. He's kind enough to donate to us and a lot of the audio equipment that you're hearing us through today. Thank you, Mr. Axe. And Dr. Lee McCauley, our wonderful audio engineer, who works very selflessly in the effort to produce this Agile Life.
He's
We love
also-
you, Lee.
He's also now the staff photographer.
Let's give him a little round of applause.
Lee, your doctorate is artificial intelligence? Computer science. Your artificial intelligence was your...
We've now made the audio engineer talk. He's going to be
that's
next
pretty
co-host
sweet.
on the podcast.
We got to get him
Yeah,
a
I
microphone.
would just like to point out that our sound engineer is also a programmer, so we eat our own dog food.
Hell yeah. All right, guys, thanks. So I'd like to thank each of the co-hosts today for joining me and give you guys a chance to tell everybody where they can find out a little more about you. Let's start with Mr. Jason Tice. Thanks for joining today, Jason.
You can check me out on website, which is just first last name, jasontice.com. Also on Twitter at ticethoughts.com or Tice Thoughts, but I have no time, so I haven't tweeted anything in a really long time. I'm bad at that.
Tice is spelled Girl.
Mean.
Ha ha ha.
No
Mr.
offense to any of the girls out there. Sorry.
Amos King, thanks for joining today. Where can people find more about you, sir?
I am found on GitHub and Twitter at adcron, ADKRON, or you can go to my still crappy blog at dirtyinformation.com.
And Mr. Matt Corwell.
I actually have not tweeted recently enough to remember my Twitter handle. I just have to look it up. So I'm at Matt Corwell, Korwl, on Twitter.
You can remember your name?
I didn't remember if it was Matthew or Matt.
You spelled your last name wrong.
No, Korwl. That's how you spell it.
Oh, I didn't hear the E.
Yeah, it's in there.
Okay.
Anyway,
It's
I'll try and
silent.
tweet something again, like sometime this month. So
Just log in right now and
You
say,
gotta
"Just
get
got
on
done
that shit."
recording.
yeah, I don't remember my password, so there's no chance of logging in. It's been a busy couple of weeks, so
I support that assertion. I feel your pain.
yeah, we should refactor it.
All right. And I'm John Sextro, guys. You can check me out at johnsextro.com, and you can follow me on Twitter at jcsextro.
You still need to change your Twitter account to JSex.
I understand.
I'm waiting.
working on it. I'm sure somebody's already got it by now.
Go, Amos. Get it.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to check out our website at thisagilelife.com to find the show notes for this podcast. And keep living this agile life.